This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From Not a Pipe Publishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
And today's secret word is air fryer.
If I take my time.
Welcome, everybody. Today's guest is Armin Tolentino. Armin Tolentino serves as Poet Laureate for Clark County, Washington, and is the author of the collection We Meant to Bring It Home Alive from Alternating Current Press. Such a fantastic book. I teach that book in my class. I love that book. He earned an MFA at Rutgers University, Newark, and his writing has appeared in journals including Rigorous, Gobshite Quarterly, Portland Magazine, and Pontoon Poetry. He works for a local government agency addressing poverty and education gaps. He's a phenomenal clapper, a passable ukulele player, and a bumbling but enthusiastic fisherman. And you can get more information about him at www.armintolentino.com. Armin, thank you for being on the show today.
Such a pleasure, Ben. Thank you so much for having me.
This one will be fun. So the first thing we have to do is tell people about these costumes we've chosen to wear, because the people on YouTube can see them, of course, but for the folks on the podcast, what's with the getup?
Summer's not over, right, Ben? And I refuse to let go of summer earlier than I need to. And I want to be near the water. I want to be in the water. And therefore, I am wearing my 1800s era dive suit, full with my copper mask and trying to chip off barnacles as we speak.
Yes, I mean the tiny little porthole in the front. Yes. Is that like an actual functional one? Like, have you tried it out?
I've gotten up to my ankles. I feel fine.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm going to get the bends quite yet in Vancouver Living. But you gotta experiment with it with different depths and see how well you can hold your breath in case things don't work.
Yes. Well, that is a great. I wanted to go with something that kind of matched, and so I got this mermaid costume, which I didn't think about the fact that as a podcast we can only be seen from the waist up, and so I'm wearing the tail, which means I can't move my legs at all. And then I'm just shirtless with this conch shell necklace. So that's probably a little awkward for you, but that's the...
I think I see some scales, though.
Yes, I've got the... If I stand up here, people can see.
Oh, yes, there we go.
Going on. So, yes,
beautifully iridescent.
Yes,
really
exactly. Yes, it was at Norwestcon. There are these craftspeople who make these fantastic tails with the purple and the blue and the green. And I was like, yes, I've got to get, because you got to have the right mer outfit. But I don't have the upper physique for it. So I apologize to viewers for that. So
your core strength is getting better though, trying to swim.
Exactly. Yes. So what have you been up to as Poet Laureate? What does that entailed?
Yeah, I serve as Clark County, Washington's Poet Laureate, and a Poet Laureate is an ambassador for poetry and the writing of and the reciting of poetry in our communities. And we're really fortunate in this part of Washington to have a role like this. I'm the third in the line of this work in my community. I get to follow the immense and wonderful footsteps of Gwendolyn Morgan and Christopher Luna, well-known and beloved poets in our community. But man, Ben, that's a hard thing where it's like, what are you supposed to do, right? They tell you like, hey, you got this now. How are you going to use your time and how do you honor it? And, one thing that was huge for me, Paul Ann Peterson, who was Oregon's state poet laureate for many years, had just reached out to me just because she's a kind person. Yeah. I guess she heard the news that I was in this role. My jurisdiction was much smaller than hers. Yeah. But she said like, hey, if you need anything. And I was like, well, what do you think is valuable, Pauline? Because I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I just got to the application phase and the yes. Now what do I do with it now that they said yes, do this? And so she was like, the thing that was most valuable to her was going around the state and doing writing workshops with people. And that really that hit me too, because for me the thing about writing that is most enjoyable is the writing. I mean, yes, it's cool to there's these ancillary things that are part of writing, these adjacent things like going to poetry readings, or getting published. Awesome things. Those are great. But nothing replaces the actual writing. And I started doing these different writing workshops for different communities, mostly to show that regardless of what you do with the writing after, there's like two lives to the writing, right? Like we think about the second lives, like all those beautiful books on your shelves, right? That's the second life. Like that's a life where you created the writing and now it's out in the world. It doesn't belong to you anymore.
Right, exactly.
Right? But that first life where you made it in the moment, all writers know that feeling of like, wow, I did something right now. That felt good.
Yeah.
And I just want people to have that moment, regardless of what that writing becomes. If anything, it's okay if if you never work on it again, if it lives in a notebook, the fact that you wrote for that hour, I think that's special. I think that's worth it for you. You deserve it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a tension in when I teach creative writing.
Yeah.
I want to honor that the writing itself is good for you. Like this is, for some people it's mental health, for, it is good for the soul. Like, so that is valuable. And then, an important part of the process is the publishing. And I mean that in the broadest sense, the sense
Right.
of being willing to hand it to someone and say, I did this thing for you. And I think it benefits the writing itself when you're thinking, I'm going to put this in someone else's hands and I owe them, this should be beneficial to them, or I'm not going to write with them in mind. And therefore I'm not going to put it in their hands. Like I'm not going to burden somebody with something that I didn't care enough about them to write for them, but owning that just the writing is of value.
Right.
And so kind of that's, with my little nestling students where I'm like, you start off and they're really hesitant to share. And it's like, that's okay to start with just writing for you. And we're going to work our way to writing for others in the writing process so that then you're ready to hand that thing off. But
that it's a communication, right? That art, I don't know if any of us can really define what art is, but I think there's an understanding of art as an experience where there is more than one sentient presence engaging with this thing. So might be one maker, perhaps. That even can be debated if you do anything on your own. But the idea that there is also someone who's going to consume this, and that's what takes writing to a different step than journaling. Even if the act might be both completely private and you may never actually share it, when you write for art, I think you're trying to make something that's some other sentient being someday could experience and say, I felt something thousands of years and millions of miles away from you, and yet I felt something. That's pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, I'm so this is TM. Nobody can steal this idea, but my one of the ways that I'm invigorating my teaching this next year is I plan to write a creative writing textbook, and I've been really reluctant to do that because I want to be the artist who is creating the art that my readers benefit from, rather than feeling like I am writing for other writers. Like that was always, I was always resistant to that. And now I've gone, okay, but I've been doing this now for 20 years and I've got so many of these lectures, and I should put this together and share this, in some new way. And the way that I'm going to design the thing, and this is the part that anybody listening to the show, do not steal this and write this in under a year. This is mine. But I'm going to write it. The whole premise is, this is not a book about writing. This is secretly a book about magic. And it's all going to be a book of like, this is how you do, and so to use the metaphor, this is a magic spell that we are weaving. And what, creating characters is a glamour, and like everything is, this, what are the constituent parts of plot that are this magical elixir. So like all of it is about magic, because you're absolutely right. We are taking runes, we're taking symbols, and we're using a magical formulation to put them into someone else's brain. And the only reason we're not astounded by that is because of its ubiquity. Like, everybody else can do it. Yeah, everybody else can do something that's amazing.
Yes.
And we should honor that. Like, this is a really amazing thing we get to be engaged in. So
and it continues to be amazing. It's just so phenomenal about that, right? And then don't take that for granted.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets mechanical. Like some
Yeah,
people just go through the steps of something, but it's like it loses the magic that you're saying. And don't forget that there is something magical, that communication is possible in this manner, that
yeah,
interchange and that we can affect each other so deeply without ever actually seeing the other person is
right.
incredible.
And we are insufficiently astounded by that. You know, like and I hope that that brings the energy into the classroom and is translated in the book itself. Like this thing you are doing is amazing. Like, you
Yes.
know,
Oh,
so yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, that's you know, that we lose something as writers when we lose sight of that too. Like,
right.
oh, you know, oh yeah, I've got to do this work. I've got to meet this deadline. I got to get this thing done. No, I'm going to do magic tonight.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes. And when like with your students, what do you like what frees them to do that step that you're talking about? Because that's very real, right? Of like, I don't want to share this. And you shouldn't have to share something prematurely.
yep,
It should be on your own terms. But I think a lot of people want to share. That's what I'm finding in writing workshops that I do. They want that opportunity to offer something, but they are thinking too deeply, I think, in the beginning of what the other people at that table are thinking about them.
yes, and I think a lot of it is it acceptable in this culture of this space for us to share? Because there's
Mm.
somebody who's going, I really don't want to share, and there's somebody who's saying, I really want to share, and they're looking at one another and they're saying, is this okay? Right. And so
Yes.
once the one person can kind of feel free to share, it opens that up for others. But yeah, you know, I've had classes where we got to the end of the semester and they still weren't comfortable sharing. You know, they would share in other ways. We would share
Sure.
documents or whatever, but they wouldn't read aloud, that kind of thing. And then I've had classes where, you know, from day one, somebody was like, I want to share what I just wrote on the
Yes.
free write on day one, and it opens it up for the whole group. And
That's
so
cool.
it's, you know, it's some of it is just how do we decide that we feel comfortable, and you know, and then I bring that kind of explicitly into the room, like this is a classroom culture we are building, and
Yes.
it's okay to read one another and figure out how we collectively feel. And
Yes.
that's, you know, that's, you know, so yeah, different groups, different space every time, which
Most
keeps it
definitely.
fresh for me too. Like,
Right? You're not bored in how many
nope.
years you've been doing this
Yeah,
work.
no two classes are the same ever. And so bringing that into the space is help, and that's helpful for the students to, you know, to
Yeah.
not go, oh, this is going to be just like every other one he's taught. Like, no, it won't, because I've never taught you before and you are
Right.
important, you know? Like,
Yeah, most definitely.
so so you know, we jumped into process. It's a show about procrastination, what we're doing when we're not writing. So what has been pulling you away? What you know, entertainment, what's been pulling you out of your writing habits lately?
Man, I could get pulled easily, and there are some things that are like the work and life things, and I won't bore you all with that. But like, yeah, there. I think it's fine to sometimes just be like, hey, there's things I want to absorb and experience, and it will inform the writing later.
Right.
I think Ben, you and I have talked. Maybe I shared this with you. I'm a big boxing fan. You know, I grew up
Yes.
watching boxing, and I didn't necessarily love it watching it with my dad. Because I didn't understand the sport well enough, but also like the thing that you do when you're a kid, sometimes like they just stick with you and you don't
Oh yeah.
realize that you're still a fan of this stuff. And so you know, like and you can't help but see metaphors in boxing and in a lot of other aspects of life, for better or worse. It's used as a metaphor in so many things. But even I think about it just in the world of writing, like when you think about the sport of boxing, right? You're only using your hands for the actual striking, right? Different from MMA. And so if you're only using your fists and you're only allowed to use your fists in certain ways, you're only allowed to use it like the knuckles. You can't do what's called a hammer fist, for example,
Yeah,
in
or back.
boxing. Or back, right? And you can't do a back fist. So if you can only use this portion of your hand, there's basically 6 punches. That's
Right.
it. That's it. There's 3 on each side of your body, your lead hand and your rear hand. And from those 6 punches, you can have so many combinations of ways to shock and surprise someone. And that just
Yeah.
recently happened. There were 2 sort of high profile boxing matches, and high profile in boxing nowadays is not Muhammad Ali versus Foreman. It doesn't get to that level, nowadays. It doesn't get to, the stars of boxing aren't as well known now as they were before. But the at the 147-pound weight, which is a very like classic weight in boxing, one of the original weight classes. These two big champions, Errol Spence was fighting this other guy, Terrence Crawford. They've been bickering for like 5 years about, oh, I'm better than you. They could never make the actual fight work. They finally fought, and no one was sure what it was going to be like, right? Because it's like this guy could win or this guy could win, and it was a wipeout. It was a complete domination by Terrence Crawford. And then
was it really was it short, or did it
lasted 9 rounds? 9 out of 12 rounds, but every round. So, and that's a good point. That boxing is scored per round.
Yeah.
Every round is 3 minutes, and you win a round basically.
Right.
And
I mean, like I remember, I remember when we were young, there was a Tyson fight that was like 13 seconds long.
13 seconds, yeah.
Spinks,
and against Spinks, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody was like, I paid for pay-per-view for this, but like, with those heavyweights, it can be really, really short. Whereas I really liked like some of the bantam weight, where it's like, no, these guys are going to just exhaust one another, and it's skill.
Yes.
Like the amount of energy. I think a lot of people don't understand that it's an endurance sport. Like
definitely.
You have to be in incredible shape to just like, if somebody was just, there was no opponent. They're not even, just jumping and punching for that long is physically so exhausting.
I challenge anyone to just hit a heavy bag, or even harder. I think a lot of times is shadow boxing.
Yeah.
Shadow box for 3 minutes, where you're also like thinking about punches coming to you, even if they're not, moving your hands and your feet and your head in some sort of coordinated fashion and an intentional fashion. Exhausting.
There is a poem about 3 minutes of shadow boxing for a person who has not boxed.
Yeah.
What is that? Like that.
Yes.
How much of that is a metaphor for, oh, I think I'm going to be able to do this. Oh my gosh, this is exhausting.
What you don't realize is that there's an ars poetica to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what is it to make this thing happen? And what was really amazing to me as I was watching this fight, and I was cheering for Crawford, the guy who ended up winning. There's something about how calm he is in the ring. And for me, as a guy who I feel fear all the time, now I'm older and I'm lucky that I'm in very secure spaces where I don't have constant external pressures that make me feel that type of physical fear. But growing up, I always had some level of that, of just thinking, what is it to be a man? What is it to be tough? And just to see a certain level of calmness in a moment like that. This is not just the physical pain that could be coming, but the pressure and people watching you and saying, I want to do my best. This is my chance. And to just see how relaxed he was.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get into that flow state where your eyes are so wide open to the moment and you're doing things on purpose? I'm doing all these steps on purpose. That's amazing to me.
I was listening to 2 different podcasts where they were talking about that within the last day. So there was an interview with a guy who got to interview Messi, who's now playing soccer in Miami.
Killing it there.
He is the most calm, like not stressed, just enjoying what he gets to do, where I would be an absolute wreck. Like the pressure is, and then I was listening to a comedy podcast and the guys were talking about watching the Michael Jordan documentary. And somebody on that talks about he is one of the most in the moment. Now he did have some stress issues too.
Oh yeah.
When he is playing, he's not the fastest. He's not the, he was an incredible leaper, but he was so locked into that moment. And that kind of flow state is, getting to watch it even from the outside. That is one of the nice things about sports as opposed to what we do, where you and I get into flow state and it would be very boring to watch.
Extremely boring. Yeah. You could not imagine how boring it is to watch me just scribble on this piece of paper like, oh, that's a cool couplet.
Like for me, it's hammering away on my keyboard for like 8 hours, and and
Yeah.
I'm like, this was so great, time went by, and that would have been miserable to watch, but
I
but
mean, they pay people to to play video games, and people just watch people playing video games.
I,
We don't have that for writing yet. I don't
no,
think.
although I've joked about setting up a camera on my keyboard and doing ASMR videos, like for people who just want to hear typing. That's yeah, it's everything's content, right? So, but yes, so did you box when you were a kid?
I didn't. I did martial arts for a very long time and was resistant to it. I think I was just do. I mean, I was doing it because my dad wanted me to do it, and he loved martial arts, and we grew up watching a lot of kung fu movies, and I was a lazy kid in a lot of ways. So I think he's like, hey, let's give him some discipline and do some stuff, and I learned a lot doing it. But it's not. I wouldn't pretend it was a passion of mine at the time. And growing up, then as an adult, I started going to a boxing gym because I enjoyed watching the sport of it. And so, I'll go to a boxing gym like I've had a membership maybe for 5, 6 years. I've been there maybe 12 times in that amount of time. But I'll show up. I'll just make a fool of myself. I love that I don't have to look good anymore. Like I want to do well, but there's no pressure. No one's expecting anything of me there. And I'm not going to get physically hurt. These are drills and, really controlled sort of space. I'm not even sparring. But I love just thinking about what mechanically my body can do because it can't do what it could when I was a teenager. I'm not flexible. I'm not fast anymore. I can't do those things. And yet it's like, hey, it can still follow my intent in different ways. I can ask it to do something and it still seems to show up at a really slower level.
Well, yeah, but also like we're at an age where we can go, I can be a fan of this thing and that's okay. Like I don't have to go, oh yeah, and I also need to participate in everything that I am a fan of in order to prove to anyone my bona fides in any way. Like I am a basketball fan at this point. I don't play at and I love NBA basketball, and I'm comfortable enough now that I have nothing to prove to anyone. It's not like, oh, I'm not a real fan unless I'm, hitting the gym with the guys and playing ball at, they play at like 5 a.m. No, I will be listening to my NBA podcast when you're all asleep at 11 o'clock at night, but I am not getting up at 5 a.m. for anything. Like,
don't gatekeep that fandom, right? Enjoy things on whatever level you want to enjoy it.
Yes.
And I don't have to yuck your yum, right?
Right. Well, I do need to get some physical exercise. Like I've been looking at I think Tai Chi would be, I'm at that age now where I'm like, Tai Chi would be really cool for flexibility and calm. Because I'm like, I've got anxiety that is disproportionate to the danger that I face in my life. Why am I worried all the time? And so I think some Tai Chi would be really good for me.
Absolutely. Just push that email to the side.
Exactly. Yes.
Love that. We got to plan that out, man. Next year, you and I will do some Tai Chi katas together.
Yes, that would be good. In fact, we could do it and then do it at like a Willamette Writers or something. People would dig that. Like, hey, we're going to lead you in a Tai Chi video that we've watched 10 times. And
call Kate up. It's done.
So speaking of anxiety, what have you been watching in the news that's been getting your attention this last week?
Too much, and my wife listens to the news a lot, and I've gotten better about I don't need to know everything that's going on. Not that it's not important to be informed, but that to what end? But what am I accomplishing for myself or others in this constant barrage of information? I mean, I think the natural disasters that we're seeing right now are really pressing on my mind. I was just in Palm Springs in March. It was my first time seeing Joshua Tree National Forest.
Which is beautiful and gorgeous. Now is getting rained on in a way.
What must it look like?
Yeah.
And it was on fire though not too long ago too. Like there were parts of Mojave that were on fire, and then you're like, oh well, rain, that might be good. It not in these levels. No, it has to be. It can't be such extremes. And so when you have this rain come in and washing away desert, I mean, how can these trees, I don't know what's going to keep them around. I mean, they were already suffering before these events became so cataclysmic and so frequently cataclysmic. So, I was fortunate to be able to see this landscape that looks so alien to me. And I don't know who's going to get to see that next. I'm thinking about that.
Yes.
Thinking about Maui and just the
Yep.
fires there. And then what's happening in Canada? Like that the
Oh,
Yellowknife. Like I
gosh.
never even heard of that city, Yellowknife.
Yeah.
And it's like,
There's a
wow,
quantity of towns that have been, evacuated. It's terrifying. Well, and I,
absolutely.
but I do think about what do we get to see? Like, on the one hand, it feels very selfish. Like, I get to see this thing and nobody else is going to get to see it. But on the other
Right.
hand, I think it recalibrates us to care. Like,
Right.
one of my goals is to at some point see the snows on Kilimanjaro,
Right.
because there will not be snows on Kilimanjaro anymore. In fact, it might be too
Yes.
late already. But I understand Kilimanjaro is a very hikeable kind of mountain, the kind of,
Yes.
mountain. And I would love to go hike that. And part of that is that sense of this is going to go away. Like, this is not,
Absolutely.
eternal in the way people
Yeah.
thought. This mountain has always been there. And so, yeah, you got to see Joshua Tree, and it will not be the same for our grandkids. Like,
Have you seen like any glaciers up close?
yes, yeah, like
Yes.
up in Canada. I went to
Right.
Banff when I was young,
Yeah.
I got to see, and they're retreating, and that's, yeah, already there are things that I have seen that are not, there were glaciers in California that are
Yes.
gone now.
Non-existent.
So, yeah,
Yeah. So that's scary stuff.
it is. And that, so then that feeds my anxiety. But part of what feeds my anxiety is like looking around going, I don't feel like the people around me are taking this seriously enough. And then I think, but because I've been lucky enough to get to go to a lot of these places.
Mm,
And it feels very foreign, I think, to some folks who
yes.
are like, oh, I've never, my folks were really big on travel. And
Yes.
I adopted that. And I'm like, oh yeah, I love to that. I would rather buy a trip than buy a thing,
Yes.
so I travel a lot, and I've gotten
Yeah.
to see a lot, and that's, I think it does connect us with the world in a broader way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, it is scary to see these places that are in such severe threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so it's like I also think about like with the conversation around AI and when you look at things, you look at images that look so real and it's like what is real or not. And if you haven't physically been to a place, you could be already thinking like everything can be duplicated digitally.
Right.
So it's like, oh, that I guess that thing looks cool because you're sort of desensitized to what things look like. You could be desensitized to what fire really looks like or violence looks like because it's been so recreated in such a convincing way
Yeah.
versus physically being present to something, experiencing with all of your senses, perhaps. And so, yeah, I don't know, like if
I
we,
think that totally changes our view of violence. Like, I know a lot of
yes,
folks who their understanding of violence is just through media. And they
yeah,
think like, oh, a fight is this thing that goes on for 5 minutes where these people are kicking one another in this ballet kind of way. And it's like, if you've ever been in a real fight,
yeah, yeah,
it's terrifying, it's fast, it's
yep,
it's not
yep,
elegant.
fast, 20 seconds, done.
Yeah, and
Nope.
it's it takes, it's not cool. Like, nobody comes out of a fight looking cool
Yes.
unless it's like a boxing match where there are rules and there's a ref and there's, because, and I think a lot of people think like, oh, if
Yeah.
I ever got in a fist fight, it would look like a boxing match. No, somebody would
No,
jump on
it's
the other
sloppy and
and we'd fall
ugly.
down, and it's, yeah,
Exactly.
it's
People
not.
don't look graceful.
But you're
Even the
right.
ones who know what they're doing don't look
We
graceful.
yeah, but we've given ourselves, you're right, we've given ourselves this false sense of what this thing would actually feel like. I think that's
Right.
the breakdown, is we don't know how it would feel if we've
Yes.
only experienced it with that remove.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you're not writing and you're not being terrified by the fact that the world is burning up and flooding simultaneously, what's a hobby that is keeping you grounded?
I mean, I play the ukulele a lot, and definitely during the pandemic, I started playing a lot more, because I started working from home, and it's like, oh, well, I just have these ukuleles sitting around, and you take a break and you strum a bit, and the pressure I put on myself as a kid to like learn the guitar and want to be really good at guitar. I don't have that at the same level with the
Yeah.
ukulele. First, it's just a simpler instrument, with that many less strings, and therefore it's like I don't have to work as hard figuring things out. But it's like I'm just playing for me. I'm not trying to like start a band or anything like that. I'm not trying to like impress any women. I'm just playing for me. So
Right,
you know,
right.
it's become fun, and like I'll waste a lot of time now going on Craigslist looking at who's selling their pandemic ukuleles. Like they've
Yes.
picked this up in 2020, and they're like, oh, I don't actually play this thing. And it's like, oh, are there deals there? It's like I don't need any more. I just start like looking at what people have. The variety of
Yes, I
these
hadn't
things.
thought of that. There's probably a glut of inexpensive ukuleles now that are
Yes.
going
Yes.
around. So, but
Don't waste your time going to Guitar Center, which I do not like Guitar Center in general, but don't waste your time going there. Go
yeah,
on Craigslist.
yeah.
We don't need new ones. Use the ones that are already out there.
Yes, the one that is sitting right now collecting dust in someone's closet. You could be playing.
That's it.
Yeah. So, but have you found that with that kind of low pressure, I'm just doing this for fun, you've gotten to a place where you're like, and I'm getting pretty decent at this and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you stick with, I mean, and we know this, you're an educator, you know this. If you stick with something long enough, you're going to get better at it, right?
Right.
We know these ideas of growth mindset and that our brain has plasticity, that we aren't born with like a limited, like a cap on our abilities. But we also know that some people have a proclivity, a natural ability, what have you. So that you may not be able to control, but your ability at getting better at any number of things, that's very true.
Yeah.
And so if you can take off the pressure of trying to be good at something, because when you have that pressure, then you stop doing the thing.
Well, and that's what I was wondering. Like a lot of the research is showing that sense of safety and not having this huge external pressure is actually really good for learning. Like the fact that you were going, I don't need to impress any girls with this ukulele.
Nope.
I'm playing for me might actually be a much better way to learn.
Right. Absolutely. I think there are these different schools of education around art where it's like just go for quantity. Don't go for quality. Make a lot of stuff, and you're going to be graded on making a lot of stuff, not good stuff necessarily.
Right.
And the good stuff comes out though if you make a lot of stuff because of the repetition and the practice of it. So inevitably, I started playing in it was 2007. My buddy had gone to Hawaii for a wedding, came back with a ukulele, and it's like, oh, okay, let me try this thing out. And then I was traveling across the country, and so I was like, okay, this is much easier to pack than a guitar. So let me just have this around. And it's like you learn a couple chords, and it's like, okay, I can play this song because I know this chord, and you stick with it long enough. It's such a portable instrument that you end up just figuring out, okay, I think I could do this now, and then you start challenging yourself more. The songs that I wanted to play in 2007, where it's like, I don't know how to do that chord, or I can't get that rhythm down. It's like, oh no, I think I could give them a shot now because my skill set is definitely better now than it was then.
Yeah. Oh, that's
actually
great.
I'm still, I'm not selling out the Moda Center, but no matter what, I can still play the thing. I can,
Well, and
I
think
can
that's one of the nice things about the
recognizably play
ukulele.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things about the ukulele too, is you don't go in with the ambition of, and I want to sell out the Moda Center, and so I'm going to pick up the ukulele. Like that's not, those don't connect. And I think that there's a metaphor there for poetry. Like nobody picks up poetry and goes, because I want to get wealthy.
Right.
This is not.
Absolutely.
And so it allows us to, enter into this art form with different set of incentives and motives. Like I'm going to create great art, not because I'm going to be rich.
Yeah.
And that's cultural.
I have no judgment at all of like people who like have this idea in their head of like, oh, I have this screenplay idea or this novel that's going to make it big. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But that's not how most poets, I don't think, approach poetry.
Well, my understanding is that this is very much culturally dependent. Like, if we lived in Egypt, if we lived in Iran, if we lived in India, you can sell out a stadium as a poet.
Yes.
Like it's, but that's not, and so that might, I will never know, but I wonder if that would affect my poetry if I were thinking, oh, I am, potentially going to pay the bills with this. That never enters into my mind as I am sitting working on a poem. I never think this one's going to pay the rent.
Or if you were writing at the behest of the king or something like that, and you have to write poems to honor the king every month and his accomplishments or the queen's accomplishments, your writing might look different. That would be more of maybe a job that maybe you still like, but it would feel more like a job versus this is a way of being. This is a practice.
And I don't want to judge and say, oh, that's, there's anything wrong with that. Like people need to pay the rent, but and so I don't think it makes our work more pure. I mean, there is, there's no inherent benefit to not paying the bills, just as there wouldn't be to paying the bills. Like they affect the work. I mean, Shakespeare was trying to sell tickets, and he still wrote really great plays. It didn't make the plays bad, So I'm not like one of these people who's like, oh, that makes it terrible that he was doing it for money. Like, no, they're great plays, but it does change the way that the work comes out.
At the very least, for yourself as a creator of something, anytime you're doing something, or let me take this away from the second person and use I statements. When I'm doing something, I have to constantly ask myself, am I doing this for me, or am I not doing this for me? And it's not that it's wrong that I do things that are not for me. There are things that I do for my colleagues or my friends, and they wouldn't be what I would choose to do. When I'm writing poems, a lot of times I'm doing it because it's what I'm choosing to do. And it's not because there is any obvious gain other than writing the poem. And I think there's something very elemental about that. And I think there's something of like, hey, if you don't have that in your practice, and if you're not walking through this world with things that you just do strictly for yourself, it would be a good question of why. Why don't you deserve that?
Well, and not to get too much of a process question here, but like, so when your book came out, when you put it together, were you thinking, I am putting together a book of poetry, or was it, I've now written all these, I can just put them together? Like, for me, it was not. Especially my second book, the poems were already there. It was just, okay, now it's this other art project of compiling. But in the process, I never thought I am writing a book of poetry. Like,
right. I was definitely thinking of like, how could this structurally look like a book? I definitely wanted that. And I definitely wanted some sort of sinew and continuity to it, even if it wasn't automatically like all the poems weren't all related. There had to be something thematically that I felt was holding them together. And especially for like the third section, which has these poems about apocalypse and extinction, like there, I was really having fun with those because it was after grad school time. So I didn't have the validation you could get from like, oh, established poet, it says this is good. I don't know if it's good. I'm just liking writing them, and I'm finding it interesting exploring what the storyline and the metaphors are within it. So that I was definitely seeing those as connective coherent pieces that would be a book. But lately, I've been just trying, because I don't have the rhythm that I've had in the past, and I'm forgiving of myself that I'm not in a super great rhythm. But it's like, then just like, well, what poem could you create now? What would it be like to play with form and start with, like, I'm trying to think back to when I was in high school and writing as a high schooler, like what was it that got me into writing? And sometimes it's just like one word sounded cool. Like when you're a kid, slang is really cool, right? Adults still like slang, they don't realize they like it.
Right.
But you think like that sounded cool, or those lyrics sound cool. It's not about the meaning necessarily. There's something about the sound of those words in concert with each other. And it's like, could I create something like that? And so going back to that play, I think is what I'm trying to enjoy right now, because I don't know if any specific collection is taking the shape I wanted it to, and I can't force myself like to bang my head against the wall to make it happen. I don't think it's making what I want to make.
Yeah, no, and I think that's healthy. Like, for me, poetry is often, the novel is this massive project that takes years.
Yeah.
And then the poem is something that right now demands it. Like, this is, and because it doesn't feel like it's bound to this poem does not need to end up in a book. This poem, I can literally share it today on Instagram, kind of a thing. Then it takes that pressure away, but it also changes what my poetry is about. Like my poetry tends to be, I'm sitting out on my back porch and a bird lands and it makes me think of something, and I'm writing about a bird on my back porch, and that's all, and it whereas I would never say I'm going to spend the next 2 years working on this magnum opus about this bird that landed on my back porch. Like, this can be this kind of immediate thing, and it's good for me to step back and look at, when I am thinking about a big project, these are the things I think are important, but maybe I need to listen more to what are the things that are springing up, because maybe those are more important. So I think that is a healthy. It's healthy to have that balance.
Right. How do we make sure we don't miss the moment because we're so focused on this other thing that's out there? And that thing, it's not that thing doesn't matter. or the investment of time, but that's not the only thing out there,
Right.
right?
Yes.
You
I
can
don't
miss a
want that
lot
to be all of
otherwise.
me. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So, to help readers get to know the folks that I'm interviewing, I always ask about if you were a character in a game of Dungeons and Dragons, what would be your race and class? Or a
Mm,
D&D character?
good. I feel like maybe I'm already more of a fantastical or shadow realm than of this human world already. Now, full disclosure, I've watched D&D games. I feel like I've hung out with D&D people, but my actual knowledge of the zoology and the hierarchies of D&D, I think, are very limited.
Same.
But you know, looking through sort of the nature field guide of these universes, I was like, is a kenku like that crow with a
Oh yeah.
cloak? Is that a species?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that a
that'd be
race?
absolutely, that would count as a race,
I
totally.
was looking at it first. It looks badass. So it's like that would be a
Right.
cool thing. But I saw that one of its skills is mimicry, and it's like, you know what? One thing that I do well is I can fit in a lot of spaces, and I don't know if that's because I'm the child of immigrants, and there's something about when you're the first generation that you don't really belong anywhere, right? Like you're not quite sure. I'm not Filipino enough, and not that people are telling me that, but I'm not fluent in the language. I didn't grow up with the culture the same way. Like if you literally grew up in the Philippines, and also no one thinks I'm white. I'm not American. That's not going to happen either, right? So I'm always sort of torn between these worlds, and so I think I've learned very well of like, oh, this is how you're supposed to act in this space. And I don't know if that's a good thing all the time, because then sometimes you could lose yourself, or you can fall into habits that aren't great. Toxic masculinity is a
Right.
clear example of how you're like, oh, I think I'm just sort of following what other people are doing, and no, you got to think for yourself, right? But I think there's something about that mimicry where it's like, oh, okay, at its best, I think I'm really adaptable in various situations, and I'd love to be as smart as a crow someday if I just keep
Yeah.
working at it. You know what I mean? They're smart animals.
Well, I think that code switching is a gift. Like
Mm,
I tell students, like, English teachers historically have been these prescriptivists where our
yeah.
job was to tell people the proper way to, and, I say to them, like, I'm not going to tell you this is the way to talk, because you should be speaking differently when you're talking to your friends behind the bleachers at a football game than you're speaking to your grandmother. Like all the
Definitely.
kids in the room, regardless of your cultural background, you know that you code switch.
Yes.
You do this anyway. You switch in terms of your register. And so the ability to code switch culturally is just another gift you have.
Wow.
But you're right. The challenge is to not lose a sense of self in that. Like,
Yes.
and that is not easy. Like, I grew up, my folks, as a kind of wonderful gift to me, put me in magnet schools where I
Okay.
was always, and the magnet schools in both San Diego and Cincinnati, the design very intentionally is, let's get kids from the burbs into the inner city schools and vice versa. And so I
Yeah.
was always, my high school, there were like 4 white guys over the course of my entire high
Yeah.
school education, and
Right.
and yet and so I felt like, okay, I understand some things, although I did not understand as much as I thought I understood at the time, which is
Of
part of being
course.
16 too. You think you know everything.
Truth.
But like, I got to get in a bus and go home to the burbs and have
Right.
all that privilege and safety. And I didn't recognize that in my formative years. I thought, oh, I
Yes.
totally understand Black culture. No, I
Right.
didn't. I
No.
understood what it was like to be tourist within Black culture for 6 hours a day or
Right.
whatever.
And the version you get to see in a school, right? And what
Exactly. It was
people
limited.
allow of themselves in a given space when they know what threats and other things can exist.
Well,
Even as you're saying this idea though of like code switching and the strength of that, I even just think of that as like for writing, you're doing that all the time, right? You're trying to get into this other head in this world in this vernacular.
yes.
And it's an act of empathy in a lot of ways. You're trying to understand best what is this other way of being, and a fully sentient being and culture outside of your own, right?
Yeah, and I think there's like levels to it. There's, how would this character say it? And that kind of gets you to that kind of dialogue lexical level.
Yeah.
And then and that's really vital. Like, you do want to actually, relay to the reader, this character does sound different than I do.
Yeah.
But then getting deeper to, how would this character think about this differently than I do? And
Right.
that's really, really hard. Like, that's an exercise in empathy that's really challenging.
Most
if I
definitely.
were writing a character who was a first generation Filipino, child of immigrants growing up in Jersey,
Yep.
can I put myself in his brain and say, this is how this would feel to him? I'm not sure I
Yeah.
could, right? But I could say, I know how Armin would say this, because, right. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That struggle to empathize is, and to understand that people do not see the world the way we do, because of our experience, is a real gift. And then to be put in positions in our own lives where we're kind of in between cultures is valuable.
Yes.
I think, yes, to be that Kenku is a thing of great value.
Yes. Okay, but now someone now will have to fact check me or tell me, what does
Right,
a
and
Kenku
I am not a
actually
D&D
do?
expert by any means either.
Yeah.
But yes, that the crow-headed mimic character, I think, is
Yes.
so cool. I think that's a great insight into your life experience and how it has benefited you.
Yes. If nothing else, the superpower of like pooping on cars and
Right.
stealing cheese,
Right.
maybe that would be fun too.
Okay, so you are this Kenku monk, and then
Yes.
you're ambushed in the woods by a couple of level 1 goblins.
Okay.
What do you do?
I have to throw down some cards. Is that what I have to do?
I don't think it's cards. You would have to roll some dice.
I'll roll some dice.
Yes, and let's say you get the numbers you
Big ass
want.
dice.
Yes. What is your strategy?
And goblins are not like really the most powerful of creatures,
No,
right? This is henchman level kind of
exactly,
thing.
exactly.
Right. Okay. I don't want to blow them away with my best stuff, right?
Right.
So it's like, I think this is the kind of thing where, as a pro, you could use a lot of tools and trickery more so than say like having to do anything super fancy. I think this is the kind of thing, crows have really iridescent feathers. I think maybe taking my feathers somehow and sort of flinging them, making them look like coins, perhaps. Maybe these henchmen would scatter for that. After that, maybe the theft of a crow, the ability to take something. I think there's a prankster nature, I think, to the crow. Like, crows have a glee in what they're doing, right? They're not just doing something to survive. They're doing something gratuitously because they have fun with it. So I think there's some sort of pranking that would happen. I don't know if crows give wedgies to goblins. But that sort of thing. Steal the change purse from them. I don't know.
This is the most Armin possible answer. Like, I'm going to enjoy this, and B, by far the most creative solution I have heard yet on the show. Everybody else is like, this is the way that I would murder them, and you're like, no, I would deceive them with my feathers. That is awesome. I love.
I don't even think. Do I even need them to not exist in the same world as me, or do I just need them out of my physical space?
Yeah, they chase the false coins, and you're out of there. I love it. I love it. Okay, speaking of chasing coins,
Yes.
We're going to go to our ad break. That was a wonderful segue. Like, that sounded professional. I'm really, really. Doug is like, like, that was nice. Wasn't that? That was nicely done, right? Okay, so we're going to go to our ad break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you what you've been daydreaming about lately.
Sounds great.
Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new merch store at notapipepublishing.com. Of course, the site has books and more books, but we also have merch like t-shirts and hats and art prints. My apologies to YouTube viewers, but podcast listeners, imagine a far more handsome t-shirt model telling you, I just got this new shirt, which shows a ghost saying, "Boo" is Latin for I shout. Seriously, look it up. You're welcome. We have hats with the logo from Unrelenting by Jesse Hennard and Marie Parks, the logo from Our Stories Within anthology, and stickers that show Justice Sotomayor saying, "Respectfully I dissent," with the respectfully crossed out because she chose to omit that in her response to the court's recent homophobic ruling. And there are art prints by Michaela Thorne, the artist and author of Tooth and Claw. Check out all the great merch at the store and use the code SHOWFAN for 10% off your entire order. All that's in the show notes. Also, we're always on the lookout for great guests and advertisers. So if you have a book or other product to sell and you're looking for a group of the most intelligent, witty, discerning readers, let us help you make that connection. Our ad rates are as low as $15, and guests will never pay to be on the show. Right, Doug? We agreed on that? We only have guests we want to talk to. Some jerk offers us $1 billion to be on the show. No way. Take a hike. Keep your billion, Elon. Stuff it in a pillow and hug it and cry because you're not cool enough to be on this show. Them's the breaks. You too, J.K. Rowling, get your hateful, racist, transphobic ass out of here. You can't buy an empathetic soul with that $1 billion, and it won't get you on this show either. The rest of you, make Writers Not Writing a part of your marketing plan today. So welcome back, everybody. Armin, what have you been daydreaming about lately?
When I'm not focused on work or things I need to do, I think about cooking a lot. Especially like during the pandemic where it's like I'm not going out, I realized, wow, like when I wasn't getting a credit card bill, I was like, oh, I spent all of that just going to restaurants or like, I love food, and not even like fancy food. I just like different cuisines and I like making things. And my wife is vegan, so I've had to think a lot about like how do we incorporate more vegetables into our diets, because she doesn't necessarily love vegetables or cooking vegetables, but she does want to be vegan and has been great and committed to it. So it's like, okay, what are the various ways that we can cook vegetables where I'm not cooking the exact same stir fry every single night? And man, YouTube has amazing. I love those videos where like you don't see the person, you're just watching a pan from above, point of view, and you just see this magical thing be made. And so I am my proudest when I could think of like there are like 7 things in the fridge that don't belong together. They're all going bad. You got like 5 more hours to use these things. How do you use that brown banana, and that spinach and make something out of that? I dig that if I can make that all come together.
What's the coolest thing you figured out how to make that's vegan so far?
Ooh, how do we veganize different meals? I just came back from the Philippines for a vacation, and that was a very non-vegan trip for me.
Yeah.
I was not raised with a very
veganism has
diet.
not hit there yet.
Yeah, not if you think of the classic cuisine of a lot of Filipino dishes, it tend to be very animal product heavy in
Yes.
a lot of different ways. But I was just thinking through like, oh, well, there's a lot of these really cool Filipino dishes that wouldn't be hard to turn vegan. And one thing is like if you're just using, I have an air fryer. Man, that thing is worth it. I didn't think I'd like it for the counter space. It's worth its counter space.
Yep.
And that thing, because you get rid of your toaster. That thing's your toaster. I don't need a toaster as well. That, using that to fry tofu, game changer for me. Because I've been spending so much time trying to season woks, and I watch all the videos. Another podcast we could talk about how I set the kitchen on fire trying to season a wok because I was trying to skip steps. And you season a wok, I think, truly by letting it cook 10,000 times versus trying to get it all done in one afternoon.
Yeah.
Anyway, like I can't get the tofu to not stick. Air fryer, you air fry that thing, no problem. And a healthier version too. So
do you season the tofu or like marinate? What are you doing with the tofu before?
Yeah, I like to do like a dry rub on it, or I'll do like a soy sauce ginger kind of blend. You don't want tofu to sit in a marinade too long because it's a sponge. All it does is soak it up. So it's going to it'll become so salty. But you give something like 15 minutes, I think that's plenty. Chop it up, and put it in, and then now that thing will have the mouth feel, the meat of things, so I'll use that in a lot of like noodle soups as well as like dried shiitake mushrooms are fantastic. Having a bunch of those around because they're so easy to rehydrate, and then the broth you make from that is now going to be part of the dish too. So it's like 2 ingredients in one when you use a dried shiitake mushroom.
So you have,
and so it creates that mouthfeel that you miss.
Yeah. That's
so I don't like. I'm trying to think of dishes that I want to like what are like. Yes, are the vegan ones, but also there are times where it's like Jenny is visiting family or something. It's like, okay, this is my time to not be vegan. I still have this goal of I've never shucked an oyster, and I would like to try shucking an oyster. But there's a lot of bad news right now about people dying from raw oysters and being blown out of proportion.
Must be done with care.
But I sort of want to see, can I shuck an oyster and put a plate of oysters out there? That would be fun.
Yes,
What are you
yes.
gonna say, man?
My son found that he prefers clams to oysters. We were up in Puget Sound.
Yeah,
They were literally in the in the sound, and we were
yeah.
finding them and cooking them up.
It's
And he was like, and so yeah, clams, oysters, if that's your thing. Like for me, too rubbery, not my favorite.
got it.
Noah loves them, and so
Got it.
that's absolutely try clams and oysters. For me, that's an excuse for a lot of butter. Like that's really, it's butter and salt. Like
Yes.
okay, that's what's going to make it work.
Yeah, just a vehicle
Uh,
for that.
but I am excited about that idea of the dry rub on the tofu, like that.
Yeah.
I think air fried. Oh, that sounds
Simple.
fantastic.
It'll hold it because there's enough moisture on the tofu to hold the seasoning on there. And then as you're frying it, then everything sort of hardens together. And so yeah, you don't have to worry about, like, people go to a lot of effort of battering things. It's like, oh, that's a lot of extra steps in my opinion.
Yeah, that's and then will it hold its consistency when it's in a soup after it's been fried?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the thing, that if you don't want things, if you're using, extra firm,
Yeah.
then it'll have that texture of like, oh, this feels more substantial than a bunch of broccoli in there.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, well, our next thing, I always put up a weekly poll. And so what is your idea for a question I should ask the world?
Ooh,
What should be our weekly poll question this week?
man. I've been seeing, I'm getting a little bit older, Ben. I'm not getting out there as much, and especially I'm definitely not in the dating scene. But I like going out and then like seeing people, and I'm thinking like, is that thing a first date? I'm
Yes.
always curious about that, right? Where you're like, do they know each other? Is this going well? I love that. My question then is, if which is a better first date in your opinion? Doing one of those sipping wine places, you go, or the painted wine, you go to these places to paint a picture, but you also have red wine that you enjoy there, or axe throwing. I'm seeing that a lot now. Axe throwing, which is the better first date to take someone on?
And even which do you propose, right? Like, like if you're, getting ready for the first date and you're saying, so I'm judging this person in advance, saying they're kind of more of like an axe throwing kind of person than a paint and sip. Like that's a good one. Yeah, okay. So I'll be interested to see where people fall on that one, which is the better idea for, and somebody's looking at that going, I never even would have thought of one of those. That is going to be my idea. So you have made someone's like future relationship possible. Just
there better be a comment of someone saying, "Oh, we're getting married next year. Thank you."
Yep.
And it's going to be an axe themed wedding.
Yep. And we're naming our firstborn child Armin, thanks to you. Like, absolutely, yes. So, what is in your to read pile right now? What are you looking forward to?
Oh, yeah, too many books. I don't vacillate, right? Sometimes there's times where it's like I want to be very fully into poetry and make sure that I'm looking at different types of poetry to keep myself sharp, to keep myself knowledgeable. But then I'm missing out on a lot of other stuff too. When I'm like, or if I'm just spending too much time reading just like craft books, which I love reading craft books and talking about theory of writing. But sometimes like you just gotta step back and read other things. One book that I'm really excited to dig into, I hope in the next month or so, is People of the Sand by Rachel King. Rachel King is a novelist, short story writer, and a poet. So, does a little bit of everything. I read her collection, Bratwurst Haven. This is an amazing short story cycle of a town in Colorado where all the characters are sort of associated with a sausage making factory. But it's really about the politics of the area, how it's changing demographics, how the sausage gets made.
That's very clever. Yes. Oh, I like that a lot.
It's about like unions and the rights of employees, and how sometimes their decisions aren't really in their best interest, and how they're just trying to survive. It's really captivating. And I had read the first short story on its own, and I was like, oh God, I hope there's more to this. And then I found out like, oh, it's actually a collection. It's a short story collection, not because I was like, I need to know what happens to these people. So based on that, I was like, I wanted to read her novel, which came out first. And People of the Sand is about, it's fictional, but it's about how Oregon, the beaches became public use. That there aren't
Yes.
so coming from Jersey, that's a really odd thing, right? Like there's so many
People from
spaces.
the other states do not yeah,
Like I can sleep on the beach. Like
Oregonians
I'm
do
allowed
not
to just do
understand
that.
how unusual that is.
Yeah.
Like, California, Hawaii, East Coast, all up and down the East Coast,
Yeah.
private beach. Sorry, you can't come here. I own this beach. My house is near it, and therefore it's
Right.
mine. Like, the fact that all Oregon beaches are public is we are very lucky. That is a very cool thing. But
Absolutely.
I didn't know there was a story of how that came to be.
Yes. So I think, from my understanding of it, I haven't dug into it yet, but I think it's really well researched as far as understanding the history of it and just using a, fictionalized version of that. Yeah, I just love the way she uses dialogue in her other book that I read. She's really good at building out characters. So I think this one's going to be fun. But every time I hear the title, I think of People of the Sun by Rage Against the Machine as opposed to People of the
Yes.
Sand. So the
Yes.
song gets stuck in my head, but thankfully I like the song. So
Well, I am excited to check that out. And the fact that you mentioned that she's a poet as well, like one of the things I find is novelists who are poets, I like their books better because you can tell they are thinking about the words in each sentence. Margaret Atwood. I think Margaret Atwood, if you asked her, like, if you could, like, get her to be really honest, she would say, I really think of myself more as a poet than as a novelist. Yeah, my novels are what's so big, but she is a fantastic poet. And I think that's why her novels are so good.
Right.
Is because she is thinking about, I mean, you'll read a paragraph and go, oh, that was a prose poem. Like, and
exactly.
So Rachel King, I will check.
Rachel King.
What was the other one? Bratwurst Factory? Was that what it's called?
Bratwurst Haven. HAVE.
Okay.
Bratwurst Haven. Which one? I think
those
I think that won the Colorado Book Award this last year.
Okay.
So
that
really
sounds
cool book.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I will. I'll put links to those in the show notes, and I'll add those to my TBR pile too. That's excellent.
Awesome.
So, where can folks find you when they're looking for you online?
The drying carcass of Twitter, I think I still have. I there's a point where it's like I think I'm just gonna stop looking, but I'm sort of in the habit to check that one out. So you can find me though there at Armin Tolentino. And then I just started one of those Blue Skies, but I didn't download the app on my phone. I'm realizing like, so for one thing, I'm not a big social media person, and I'm realizing like, oh, I just don't have that much interest in looking at it. I like looking, like I personally don't have much interest in posting. I do like sharing when like something cool's happening, like there's events, I like sharing that, but it's like I don't really have this burning desire to spend time looking at this stuff. But Twitter was built at the time in such a way that it was so easy to consume things.
Yeah.
And it's such a variety of things, right? So I could follow boxing, I could see how the Knicks are doing, and then I could learn all about writing at the exact same time and see animal videos. It was really cool that way. And I don't know if Blue Skies is going to be the same way, but I guess we all have a responsibility that if we want to build a new virtual world, we have to pick up our shovels.
Like, that's the trick. Yeah. I mean, the great thing about I had interaction with people on Twitter that I never, Roxanne Gay, responded to one of my, and it was just like 3 words. I mean, but it doesn't matter. I was like, oh my gosh, Roxanne Gay just, responded to me like in a way that, never would have been possible. And that was so cool. But it's where the people are. Like, I would love to get away from Twitter, and I largely did get away from Facebook because they became so toxic and gross. And at the same time, for the sake of promoting writing, I've got to be on them to go, hey, please do check out this great novel by Karen Eisenbray or whatever. I am interested to see if Blue Sky gets enough people.
Yes,
the place where the people are, and also gets to have that healthy interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not really for some people. Social media, it's not like a choice. Like it really for livelihood, it's necessary.
Yeah,
and to support other writers, that's a really critical thing. So I don't take it lightly that people are willing to do sort of trudge through some of the stuff that isn't always pleasant, right? To trudge through.
Yeah. So, who else should I get on the show? Who's somebody you would recommend having on the show as a guest?
Have you met Stephanie Adams Santos?
I don't think so.
Oh man, and I should be more prepared as far as remembering what her latest collection is. But it just came out. So she's a poet, but also a screenplay writer. And I think also like sort of just a really spiritual, mystical person in a
Mm.
lot of ways. She's just really quite brilliant and a real community builder. But her latest collection was selected by Jericho Brown. So hey, it's getting vouched by for some really amazing people, and this latest collection really focuses on some Latin American mythology, and it just is. I haven't gotten to dig into that one, so that's also on the to read pile. But just some fascinating Dreams of Xibalba, I think it's called. But she's just an incredibly fascinating person. So talking to her about making movies, but also poetry and spirituality, I think you're not going to be bored talking to her.
No, she sounds fascinating. Yeah, I will reach out, see if she'd be willing. That'd be great. Okay, so before we finish up the show, I've got to thank some folks. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3 Ds. And thanks to Halizna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you're in a band and you'd like your song used on the show, I'd love to highlight a listener's work like Max's song, so email that to me. Thanks to Doug, the producer, as always, for making the show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of Not a Pipe Publishing. So please go to notapippublishing.com, check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. If you like this show, rate and review it wherever you found it. Please check out Armin's We Meant to Bring It Home Alive. Tell a friend about it. I mean, you will tell a friend about it. It's so good, but please get yourself a copy. And then give it a review. Don't skip that last step. Even a short review and that single click on that 5th star makes a huge difference to authors. So if you've got 3 minutes, make Armin's day. And I'm too old to tell you to smash that like button for this show, but if you could tap it an odd number of times, that would be really helpful. Armin, let's give some folks some advice for this next week. What's a piece of advice you would want to give people as they're going into their week?
Remember, coffee cannot replace sleep.
Yeah, that's important. I would also say a book without spaces would be gibberish, and our lives need spaces too, so don't ignore the spaces. And third, no matter how much you procrastinate, we're still proud of you.